Recording in progress.
All right. So Rebekah, McAleese, myself, Carolyn, Joe, Paul Jokers, and Jim Brown. We're all proud to be able to present our members this interview with Drew Baxter, a retired law enforcement officer from Hillsborough Sheriff's Department in the state of Florida. And before we get to go on this, awesome. Thank you. And so you wrote an article that quite a few of our members have truly enjoyed and appreciated. And if you wouldn't mind sharing with us what brought you to write that article, what experiences in your lifetime led you to that, and we'll take it from there.
Well, it all, as the article says, it really did all start on the front porch with my father. We used to listen to a Bearcat scanner similar to the one I have over my right shoulder here, but that was like my entree into hearing what a dispatcher does, or what an emergency call taker or an emergency dispatcher does. And I had the police bug. I always wanted to be a cop. Growing up, I was a cop every year for Halloween, and so I would listen to the radio with him every day. And when, you fast forward to when I got out of the military and I was down here in Tampa, I wanted to become a part of a certain agency, the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office. There was no two ways about it. I didn't want to work anywhere else. And just as timing would have it, they ended their last academy. However, the recruiter was, negotiated or kind of opened the door for me to become a dispatcher. And I think he thought, well, let me just sell this guy a bill of goods and get him into the communications area. And I was thinking the opposite. I was like, this is cool. This is the greatest thing in the world, because, this is another connection to my dad. And this is something that I've always wanted to do anyway. And this is a great learning experience on my journey to become a law enforcement officer. So I did that for 2.5, close to 3 years. I was a dispatcher. I was promoted while I was up in our communication center. But what it most certainly did was open my eyes to a lot of things that are unspoken in the communications world, like the trauma that a communications or an emergency call taker experiences. And it's still not talked about as widely today as I wished it was, because later on in life, I had this great, robust career in law enforcement, and 25 years later, I became the lieutenant who ran the exact same communication center I started in. And it was an honor to be the law enforcement representative, kind of the liaison to look over some of the people that I had started with. And one of the things that I noticed when I first got up there was the only thing that really changed was some of the equipment and some of the paint. And that's about it. And not all the paint either, by the way. But those were the only changes. The rest was about the same. Like the general, like the accumulation of trauma, the repeated kind of mental beatings that the dispatchers go through, that the emergency call takers go through day in and day out, the lack of support sometimes from the administration, because they don't really understand what goes on in that communications environment. And
so you had the opportunity to do it yourself.
Yes.
Then fast forward 25 years into your career, or towards the end of your career, you're now put in charge of that comm center. So you sat behind the probably 3 screens back then.
Yeah, right.
To going and leading the individuals that are sitting behind the 5 to 6 or even 8 screens. So you clearly understand that this is not secretarial or clerical, in dirt work.
This is so far removed from clerical work. I always use the same kind of example, like, not to pick on any support people in a police agency or fire department or whatever, but the chief's secretary or the guy that works in the radio shop or Ginny that works in payroll, they're lumped into the same category as these emergency communications dispatchers who take these traumatic calls, 100, like there's 100% chance of them taking a traumatic call every time they walk through the door. The chief's executive assistant, I mean, you know, he or she works Monday through Friday, 8 to 5 with holidays off, and just doesn't comprehend or understand the 24/7 environment or the lack of sleep, but just essentially also the lack of respect that the communications people receive.
Understand. Yeah. Yeah, I'm in lots of words right now. I mean, you know, and you started talking about the article, and that article hit so many key points on the experiences of a dispatcher. And I'm sharing that article with a couple of people when this last year when I was working on my RPL service project, which was reclassification efforts, focusing mainly on my state, but I was still working on forwarding things nationally. And while I didn't make much progress, I now have 2 counties in our state that have reclassified. And from people that I talked to, from our union president for the firefighters to, you know, my elected officials, they all were like, we didn't understand that or realize when they read the article, even if you just look at the points that you bring up, and you don't really get into the, you know, explanation of them. They're just like, we didn't understand and realize that you do that, that you guys go through that almost every single day.
Right. I mean, somebody very wisely pointed out the other day that being is the more it gets shared and the more people, you know, return, you know, just either drop a note that says thank you. I'm not in this for the thank you. I'm in it for the exposure of the problem, not the exposure of the guy that wrote the article. So every once in a while I'll get a thank you or a, hey, you hit the nail on the head on this. And that's the other thing that tells me that I'm on point, because not only did I see that nothing changed in my communication center, across the country, everybody is saying the exact same thing. So I don't understand how people don't understand or at least won't take the time to listen. I think you're 100% right, Rebekah, in the fact that people just automatically assume. I mean, they see your uniform or they see that you're treated the same as you know, the officers or the firefighters in a certain sense, from a disciplinary standpoint, even.
Right.
But you're definitely not treated the same when it comes to, you know, the health or the mental health aspect of it, or being included in debriefs sometimes, or being included in the training scenarios. So listen, I urge anybody to listen to read the article. I have a YouTube video that I did that, yeah, it stays along the same lines. Feel free to go to my YouTube channel, which is Drew Breezy. I'm not Breasy, by the way. Again, I'm not pumping my own tires. If you want to go. If you don't, you don't have to. But this is, you're using it exactly what I intended it to be used for, just to shed light on a very dark subject that people refuse to even look at sometimes. And unfortunately, it's the people that we trust the most, our own administrators, that they just don't want to see it. They don't. They just think, well, this well-oiled machine is running, you know, so well. Let's not disturb anything in it. Well,
and they're just not living it.
Right.
So to them, it's working, but for us,
right,
this ain't quite working. This ain't, you know, I mean, it's not cool that we always are included all the negative
you don't have
stuff.
to worry about it because it is being handled.
That we always are included all the negative.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Drew, you brought up a couple of really key points there. When you mentioned peer support and training, so it made me think of 2 specific incidences that probably about 5 years ago, maybe a little bit longer, when my department first started putting together an active shooter protocol. And they teamed up with the police department. I work with fire. They teamed up with the police department because obviously a situation like that is going to need both law enforcement and fire on a pretty, you know, coordinated effort. and they were developing a specific TIMS team, tactical EMS team for evacuating victims and stuff. And so we went to one of our vacant schools and set up an active shooter drill, and they invited, which I appreciated, they invited the dispatchers to come, and I thought, oh, great, this is so that we can practice what we need to do as a dispatcher. No, we sat and listened to the presentation, which was a lot of information, but then when we got to the actual drill, they put us in chairs in the hallway so that we could just observe instead of going in instead of going in the classroom that they had set up as the makeshift dispatch center and doing our role, where they had other people that were facilitating as dispatchers. Okay, while this was still great information, I still don't know what I need to do if I get this call.
Well, you're not exercising any muscles by watching all of that go down. I mean, I think, just speaking as a cop, we know what goes down. I mean, you see what happens. A guy walks into a building with a gun and starts shooting people. But the other half of that is that most administrators may not recognize, or training divisions or whatever. Where do you think all those 911 calls are going to pour into? Where do you think you're going to get all of your information from? Right. And if you read any debrief that's been published or any publication, whether it's Uvalde or Marjorie Stoneman Douglas or way back to the Littleton, the high school in Littleton, the first thing to go generally is the communications area, because if it's a PSAP, you're going to get bombarded with not just 911 calls from people that are inside the building, but people that are outside the building, to include parents and curious cops and administrators and fire administration, and just it's an overwhelming incident. And if you're in charge, so to speak, or you're charged with the command and control of that, or at least setting up the response or notifying people, well, you ought to be included in the scenario itself to exercise the same muscles they're exercising.
Right.
It seems simple to me.
And here's the thing, so we touched about it on a previous attempt to record this, firefighter Maydays, and now Rebekah, excuse me, and now Rebekah is bringing up a good point as far as the active shooter, where here you go, the training is come and watch us do it, and then you can leave, where we should be involved. And overcoming the adversity of that lack of training, I think a prime example is another topic that's near and dear to you and trying to get the word out. And that's the example that dispatcher Keith Thornton from Chicago Police Dispatch, when, again, there's probably not a whole lot of officer-involved shooting training that the dispatchers get, but this gentleman, shined a light on what a communications officer truly should be doing in a law enforcement-involved shooting. And just another example of the fact that we are not clerical secretarial, that we're in it, and we're part of the emergency response. So if you'd like to talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, there was a dispatcher or an emergency call taker, I'm not sure what her role is, by the name of Patricia Bounds, that actually supported Keith Thornton Jr. in that endeavor. Keith Thornton obviously got all the accolades because he was the voice on the radio and the one that took command of this whole thing. But as well as I do that when stuff like this happens, it's a team of people, and there shouldn't be any more shining example of the fact that the team needs to be trained on what to do. I think if any of you or anybody listening looked around your communication center tonight and something like an officer-involved shooting or a Mayday goes out, you kind of probably have an idea of who's going to freeze and who's not, and it's understandable. But it should all be overcome with training. We should at least be trying to exercise those muscles. So Keith Thornton Jr., to me, that whole thing when Officer Ella French was murdered, essentially what happened is there were 3 officers in a patrol car. They pulled over a car with an expired tag. This is in Chicago. And one officer is dealing with the driver, and the driver runs off, while the 2 other remaining officers, they dealt with the passenger who really had nothing to do with anything. and then a second guy that was in the back seat. And that second guy reached into the passenger compartment of the car and he pulled out a gun and he shot and killed Ella. And he shot Officer Carlos Yanez in the head, but luckily he survived that. Carlos Yanez survived that. He's here today to talk about it. So when the third officer heard the commotion, he was in the process of handcuffing the driver. He ran back over to see what was happening, and much to his shock, he saw Ella laying there, or both of them laying there, and he got on the radio, snapped into a leadership mode that I haven't heard. Absolutely took control of every aspect of that, to include setting up a perimeter to catch the suspect, to make sure that the officers were getting proper first aid, shutting down intersections so they could, throw those officers in the backseat of a car. Level of communication and leadership that was beyond commendable, and may have contributed to saving the life of Carlos Yanez. And the emotion that goes with this is that, he's looking at things from a 30,000-foot view. A street commander, a shift commander, or an officer is looking at things from the ground level, and he's telling them where to go and what to do, and literally having to tell them to be quiet because he has the experience of walking through people in their most horrible times. And that's what emergency call takers do on a daily basis. So, a very tragic ending for Ella, obviously, but a very commendable job by Keith Thornton Jr. And it was just another shining example that this guy is a first responder. It's very clear that the janitor who gets the same retirement, who gets treated the same, the same pay raises because it's lumped into cops and civilians or firefighters and civilians, however it's classified. But there is no way, if you listen to that and you have a sane brain cell, that you're going to say, nah, that guy he's clerical. That's not clerical by any stretch of the imagination. In fact, he was, I think, told somehow that the officer was killed, and you can hear him, that he's crying and upset, but he maintained, and he knew what he had to do to serve his community. And you bring up a key point,
that just because in the recording, all you hear is Keith talking. I mean, if you really listened in the background, you can hear other people, feeding him information or saying, hey, I'm doing this or whatever, while you can't maybe understand him, that they're talking to him and saying, hey, I've got this, I've notified this. And you're right, it is truly a team effort. Just because you don't hear them on the radio doesn't mean that, they're not there supporting him as he's relaying it on the air. There's so many different aspects. They were calling the medical hospital, giving them the heads up. They were, notifying, chiefs and other people that were in districts or precincts or whatever you call them in Chicago, that, hey, we've got this incident and we need, all hands on deck right now.
To your point, I did a research project when I worked in the communication center when I was running it. It's called Mitigating Stress and Trauma in the Civilian Workplace Sector. And it deals specifically with workplace trauma, and a lot of the trauma, or a lot of the workplace stressors that emergency call takers and emergency dispatchers feel is exactly what you talk about, the necessary teamwork. So in other words, when you're focused on trying to get something done, but you have somebody in your ear screaming, out directions, or you probably live 2 lifetimes in one incident like that. I mean, there's no question in my mind that your adrenaline, the adrenaline that pours out of your heart,
dispatch is like dog years.
Quite literally. Yeah, it's probably 6 to 1, so this is not something, again, I like not to beat the chief secretary up too bad, but this is definitely not the same kind of stress that the chief secretary endures.
No, and So here you are, it's strange, and it feels like awkward that dispatchers don't really talk more about this, because it's very hard to say like, wow, I just want to be respected, when you have so many um law enforcement officers and firefighters that are losing their lives, in the process of conducting their business. But we're losing our minds, and it's
Yes.
kind of hard to feel like how can I cry about this when this is happening. But at the same time, like, we are in the trenches where to Rob Ricardo's
Right.
his theme, within the trenches, like, we're in those trenches, we're fighting alongside them. Yeah, we're removed because we're in the command post, but I mean, think about the military, the service. Okay, so you join a service, you're considered a member of the military, your armed forces. It's like there's the military, and then there's public safety, and we're in with the public safety, but we're being told like, no, you're not. I'm sorry, no matter what job you will have, if you're in the Army, Marines, Air Force, Coast Guard, the Navy, whatever your job is, once you get out of boot camp, you're a member of that service. And so, we go through our little boot camp. It's not as intense or whatever as the others, but we still have our, about 30 out of 50 states, we have a basic minimum training court that we have to go through in order to put our headset on. And then we're wearing that headset. We're part of the team. And so therefore we should be getting that recognition, and we should be willing to fight for it. And if you've joined this group, you are willing to do it. So now you got to take that next step and do it. And having you on here today is so important, because you're giving us the examples and the talking points to share with our members of Congress, the senators, even local government. It helps to have someone, again, you did it, and then you were leading it. You're in the law enforcement field, and so it's really great to have, as we've said before, an administrator who gets it.
That is, I said it the other day, that's probably the highest compliment that somebody can give me, to tell me that I get it, and I take that with pride. I think that any administrator or any lawmaker that doesn't understand this one thing, or may not understand this one thing, but there's a huge difference between safety and trauma. So you can be removed from the safety of an incident. So if a police officer is going to do a traffic stop and somebody pulls a gun, sure, the dispatcher is not gonna, they're not gonna endure the safety of that. They're not gonna have to be protective of the safety, but the trauma is the exact same. And there's plenty of studies that show that. Like, in some cases, the trauma is even worse in a communication center, because number one, it's more frequent, and it probably accumulates a little bit quicker because it's so frequently done. Like a cop can go, a whole week without a traumatic call, if they're lucky, but a dispatcher or an emergency call taker does not have that luxury. That's pretty much a 100% guarantee each night that they show up. So if you could ferret out the safety and danger part from the trauma part, because safety and danger plus trauma is definitely taking a toll on the heart, lungs, and brains of our first responders, our firefighters, and police officers. But the trauma is, it's probably 80% of it. And that's what dispatchers, emergency call takers, emergency dispatchers are enduring day in and day out, like, without doubt. And they're definitely not on the same plane or looked at in the same light.
Exactly.
And that brings up an interesting little story that I came up with several years ago when I was going through a period of burnout, and so I took a break from emergency communications, and I went and applied for just a general customer service job. And during the interview, it went well. And at the very end, they thanked me for my time, and they said, unfortunately, we can't offer you the job because we really need someone who has customer service experience, and you don't have any. And I kind of was like, okay, thanks. And so I started to get up to leave, and then I kind of paused for a minute, and they were like, what can you do a question? And they said, yeah, I said, I just have a comment I want to make to you. I said, what makes you think I don't have customer service experience? I've been working in the 911 industry for like 6 years at that point, was my history. And well, they're like, exactly. They're like, that's emergency services. They're not, you're not doing any customer service. And I'm like, but in essence, my customers are my police officers, my firefighters, the citizens that I serve. I said, they're calling me for a service that they need at that time. And most of the time, it's at the absolutely worst time in their life. And I'm having to do everything that I possibly need to do to get not only an address, but what the emergency is. So exactly, I mean, that's probably the most stressful time of, or most important part of customer service.
Yeah, but you don't kiss their butts, and that's what that was their concern. Their customer service is, we want someone able to kiss butt, and the customer's always right.
I mean,
exactly.
exactly.
That was their
What
version
great
of customer
example
service.
of
That's why I
customer
hate
service.
that's why I hate customer service when we talk about it in the industry, because it's not customer service, it's professionalism. We have to be professional while we're dealing with our customers,
Yes.
and our customers are the community. Our customers are law enforcement, fire and paramedics. But so we're to act we're to act professional, but we're not sorry, what's that, that's not who we are, because we're not butt kissers. This isn't Burger King. Get it your way.
Well, just along those lines, like, I don't. What administrator worth their weight in salt would want somebody who is maladjusted taking the first phone call, essentially the voice of the agency? So, in other words, when somebody calls 911, they don't know who they're talking to. They're talking to an emergency call taker, but if you're not taking care of the mental health of that emergency call taker, that's somebody that's speaking on your behalf, and that's somebody who's trying to draw information out of somebody who's in crisis, enough information to get your assets there safely and to render aid to the customer, if you want to call them customers. So just that's the ultimate in customer service. There isn't any finer line that you have to battle than pleasing somebody and saving. Just ask anybody that's made it through a 911 call if they appreciate your customer service or not. I mean, and by the way, I've yet, even as an emergency call taker myself, or an administrator, I've yet to hear anybody call 911 to thank me for anything. So, when you've got somebody on the line, they're not necessarily in the best frame of mind, yet you're trained well enough with repetitive persistence, or how, just managing crisis and maintaining or having to control your own adrenaline to be able to get vital information out of them to save their lives, to save everybody else's lives, to include the lives of the people that you work with.
Exactly.
No, absolutely. And you see the headlines in the newspaper when an unhealthy dispatcher took it out on their caller, or failed to do what their duty because of being broken.
Right.
And here's where, like, people are like, oh, will you quiet down about being first responders? They're going to hold us to a higher standard. And it's like, well, we should be holding ourselves to a higher standard. The administrators and the city administrators, the politicians, they should all be holding us to a higher standard. And they should also be making us and our equipment a higher priority. And the training, it should be, the training should be a higher priority. But the training is, oh crap, if they're training, I got to fill that chair in, because that chair can't go empty.
Right.
And that's the struggle. But I love your article. I love the fact that you're trying to share key story, and we can honor him and our profession by continuing continuing to share his experience, share his amazing work that he did that evening to try to save both officers. And obviously, he didn't know it at the time, or as it was happening, he started to realize that the one was, unfortunately, you were not able to, there was no saving that officer, but we did have another officer be saved. And so, we deserve to have the recognition of being first responders, because clearly these examples and the issues that you bring up in your article clearly demonstrate that we're not secretaries and we're not clerks.
That's true.
So we have a few more minutes left. So at this time, I want to again transition to the fact that now's the time to get a hold of your senators and bring this 911 Saves Act home, because it's in the second year of its second term trying to get through Congress. And I'm always talking about co-sponsors. Well, we're beyond the point of co-sponsors. We're getting to the finish line of the session, and hopefully of getting it made into a law. And how we're going to do that? Contacting your senators and explaining to them that the House has already passed the 911 Saves Act because they passed it when they passed their version of the National Defense Authorization Act. And if the Senate were to tuck the 911 Saves Act law into their National Defense Authorization Act, when they start to debate that and hopefully pass the National Defense Act, if the 911 Saves Act is in their version, there's a government employee, the parliamentarian, I cannot say that word.
Parliamentarian.
That one. Thank you, Rebekah. His job or her job is to review both versions of the bill from each house, and they have to line up. If something's in one and not the other, 90% of the time it's going to get kicked out. And that's what happened in the last session, the 116th session of Congress. The House put it in. It wasn't in the Senate. The gentleman or the lady in charge of reviewing the bills took the 911 Saves Out language out of the House version. So our job in the last few months of 2022 is to convince our senators to figure out the process, who they got to get a hold of, and make sure that the 911 Saves Act bill, the language of the bill, is inside their version of the NDAA, National Defense Authorization Act. And we talked about it in our previous attempt to record this. If you hire a mechanic, you hire a carpenter, you don't care what tools they use, as long as they know that they have a tool to get the job that you ask them to get done. They find the right tool and they use it to get, and you have a successful interaction with your mechanic or your carpenter, because the product that you ask them to fix is fixed. So we're asking Congress to pass this law. I don't care what tool they need to use in order to pass it, but just get it done.
Just a reminder also, this is no longer a luxury, because next gen 911 is right around the corner. Yes, and everybody's pushing for next gen 911. But mental health wise and trauma wise, we're not even in the 1900s yet. We're not even in the 1990s yet. And so soon we're going to be, as dispatchers, you're going to be looking at screens of blood and gore, and you're not ready for it. It's just, It's a different level. So I wish you the best in your fight. And if there's anything I can do, I'm going to share my research project with you, but I'm more than happy to do it.
Reach out to your senator, sir.